Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Happy Moment. My name is Dan. Glad to have all of you with me today, and I've got a very special guest today. His name is Jay Watson, and along with his friend Kyle Wiltshire, they co authored a book that asks the question, what happens if dead rock stars really weren't dead? What if they were actually alive and trying to save the world? Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, glad to have you on. So, Jay, this is an interesting concept here. How did you and Kyle come up with it?
Kyle and I went to college together, and we watched a bunch of really bad movies while we were in college. We loved watching all the stuff that I think we found a list one time, and it was like the 50 worst movies that have ever been made. And number one on the list was the movie Highlander 2. I don't know if you ever remember any of the Highlander movies, but it was, this story about this guy who was eternal. He didn't die, and others from time to time, other Eternals would show up and they had to have a sword fight and cut each other's heads off. And it had Sean Connery in it, and it was just ridiculous. And we just started watching, bad movies and then good movies, and then we talk about them. And we kind of got to a point where even after we were married and living in different states, we'd still call each other and talk about stuff we watched together. And inevitably, there would always be a time where we'd say something to the effect of, and this is probably a famous quote for just about anybody in life. It's like, I think I could do that better. And that's a pretty dangerous statement when you start to put your money where your mouth is. But Kyle and I, we talked a lot about different ideas we had. And then one day I was driving to work. He was driving to work. And he's like, hey, I had this idea. Apparently, Kyle had seen kind of some news article where a plane had landed in a Louisiana swamp and disappeared, and they never found it. And he started to think about it and was like, man, that'd be a great way to fake your death. And then he started thinking about other things. And then he was like, what if every rock star from the 1950s to the 1990s and beyond, those that passed away too soon, there's a 27 Club, there's things like that. These people that were super gifted, super talented, but for whatever sad reason, their life ended too early. And Kyle had this thought of, what if they didn't die? What if, because, we live in Tennessee. I live in the Nashville area. Kyle lives in the Nashville area. And Elvis Presley is inescapable. And both of us grew up a long time seeing the National Enquirer, things like that at grocery stores where it talk about how Elvis was spotted. Elvis was sighted. And so there was always this idea of Elvis is not really, dead. He's alive. He's just hiding. And over the years, there have been other rock stars that have kind of had that kind of idea pitched their way. And Kyle had that idea about the plane. He had the idea about, Elvis, and just said, what if every rock star that passed away too soon, what if they didn't die? What if they faked their deaths to become secret agents to save the world? And I heard that and I said, Kyle, I don't think that's $1 million idea. I think that's $1 billion universe. I think that is the coolest idea I've ever heard. We should do that. A couple weeks go by, nothing. Couple more weeks, nothing. And for whatever reason, that idea I couldn't escape it. Started to think about it. Started to, have dreams about it. And finally, I was just like, hey, man, what if I wrote the first couple of chapters? If I wrote the first couple of chapters and you like it, then maybe you write a couple of chapters and then I'll write a couple of chapters and we'll just see where it goes. And so I did. I wrote the first 2 chapters and he loved it. He got excited and it kind of got his juices flowing and he started writing. I loved what he did. Next thing you know, we had 8 or 10 chapters of this story and we thought to ourselves, we've got something here. And so that's kind of where it began. That's the idea. And that's kind of the beauty of kind of what we're doing together. It's a piece of fiction. It's a piece of fun, ridiculous fiction that we got to write together that we solely wrote for the purpose of entertaining ourselves and seeing if we could actually tell a good story. And I believe we were able to do that. And it's really fun to share it with the world.
Awesome. What kind of rock stars do you have in here that you can share? I'm sure there's probably a few that maybe you want to keep secret, but who can you tell us is in here?
Yeah, unfortunately, Kyle's not feeling very well tonight, so it's just me. Kyle is a lot more secretive than I am. I share all the things, and so Dan, you're in for a treat because you're going to get all the information. Our story takes place in 1999, and Elvis Presley is leading the DRS, and that makes him around 60 years old at the time. We thought about what would it be like to have a 60-year-old action star. And the reality is Tom Cruise is still jumping off of buildings and, diving off of cliffs with his motorcycle and stuff, and he's right there. Harrison Ford recently played Indiana Jones at the age of 80. So the idea of some of these secret agents being in their 50s and 60s and still operating actually made sense to us because it's something that can be pulled off now. Why couldn't it have been pulled off then? And so, we have people that are from the 50s that passed away early, like Buddy Holly. And then we have people, our story is set in 1999. And so Tupac, Biggie, Kurt Cobain, they're all a significant part of our story, and everybody in between. Name a rock star, Dan, and I'll tell you if they're in it or not.
Jimi Hendrix.
Absolutely, he's in it.
Let's see. How about Janis Joplin?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There's a whole bunch.
Just about anybody you can think of is in it, and it is a lot of fun. Kyle and I did not know how to make a movie, so we wrote a book. And in our lives, movies are a big deal, and we like to go to see them. We like to take them in. We like to talk about them, and they make an impact in our lives, especially if it's a great story. We both love stories. Marvel recently pulled off a pretty amazing feat by having 20-something films and being able to have it culminate in one movie that all did so well and so amazing, and we love that story. Well, that's character after character after character after character. I grew up in the 80s, and so the A-Team was a big deal to me. I loved watching B.A. Baracus and Hannibal and Faceman and all those people, and they all had special skill sets and special talents. And so we thought about, our story's a little bit like Men in Black. It's a little bit like Kingsman. And we thought about these rock stars having different abilities and traits that help make them a fully functional team. So Jimi Hendrix is our wheelman. He's the guy that can drive and do great things with his car. Jim Morrison is the team combat specialist. He teaches everyone how to fight. He has his own dojo. Janis Joplin is communications. Jerry Garcia is kind of like the camp counselor or the school counselor in a way. All of these. It's a very funny story, and it's meant to be silly and ridiculous. But at the same time, you can't avoid some of the sadness of the lives of these people that passed away too soon. And so we have some conversations about 12-step groups, and Jerry leads those things, and Jerry has people that lead him as well, and they kind of talk about their past and their addictions and how they're working together to kind of be a family and to be able to take. In some ways, kind of restore things for them. The world was very kind to them and gave them so much, and now it's a chance for them to give back to the world. So it's a little bit redemptive. It's a little bit restorative. It's also just fun. And each character kind of has different roles that are important to the team. And we created a character that isn't a rock star at all. But in 1999, the world is changing. No longer rock stars are the most influential people in the world. It's tech stars. You've got your Elon Musk, you got your Zuckerberg, you got your, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. These people are changing the world in 1999, or beginning to, most of them, they're on their way. So we created a tech star that the DRS needed and wanted him to fake his death so that he could help them save the world from this threat that's happening and coming towards the end of 1999 that they don't know how to stop because it's not traditional war. It's ones and zeros. And so they've recruited this tech star, and we get to tell the story through Colt Denton, who is our tech genius, about him kind of looking into this world for the first time. And so we kind of see the DRS universe through his eyes. So he brings a different trait. So much like a superhero team, or much like Kingsman or Men in Black, we have people that have gifts and abilities, and they all work together for a common good.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It's super fun.
So is this like how crazy are you getting here? Like, I mean, is this what are they protecting the planet from? Are they, like, just other humans or aliens from outer space? Or
I don't know if I'm allowed to answer this. There was something that happened towards the end of 1999 that was pretty scary for most of the world up until it happened.
Yeah, the whole Y2K scare.
There it is.
Okay.
So some of the things that they're battling are alternative historical events that are fiction, or alternative historical fiction. And so we take real events and kind of weave it into this mythical, story that where Elvis and his team are trying to stop Y2K from ruining the world. And we take the actual what is happening in Y2K and make it much more bigger than a poor computer programming code. We make it much more significant. There's much more nefarious things going on, and they're trying to stop what happens.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned Marvel earlier. Is this book one and done? Are you planning on like creating like 20 other books in the universe, or what are your plans for it?
Yeah, well, you're barely a child of the 80s. I'm a little bit more of a child of the 80s. I'm 46, and so I'm a little bit ahead of you. Um, the best movies in the 80s were the ones that had trilogies. And so we're not looking for a Harry Potter 7 or whatever. We're not looking for all the different stories and all the different angles. We want to tell a good beginning, middle, and end. And we have this mapped out. We have a really good idea of how we want to do it. It's just going to be kind of a matter of demand. If the book does really well, then we're going to work on these two other stories. Our universe is fairly expansive. And so there might be an opportunity to tell a side story about one of these characters in the past, decades before. But the goal of the Dead Rock Stars book, this original piece, is going to be these 3 books that kind of tell the story of Cold Denton. And we're pretty excited about that.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned that between you and Kyle, you had started off alternating chapters. Is that Was that what you did throughout the entire book, or did you switch things up at some point?
Kyle is very gifted at continuity. He does a really good job with the details and making sure what we say in chapter 2 is chapter 8 and all those kind of things. Initially, I was really good at kind of the more creative, crazy parts of the story, made up a bunch of stuff. I loved action scenes. I love the dialogue, between characters, the snappy repartee, if you will. And Kyle was really good about putting the pieces of the story together. And so in the first 8 or 10 chapters, we rotated, alternated. But once that was kind of done, we went to a whiteboard and we took sticky notes and put it on the whiteboard. I know it's silly, but if you write on a sticky note and put it on the whiteboard, you see it. And if you don't like where it is, you can peel it off and you can move it somewhere else. And so we took a whiteboard, we took sticky notes, and we wrote chapter ideas, just the loose idea of kind of what needed to happen in this chapter. And we started to put them all up on the whiteboard, and we started to kind of outline our story. And we get to a certain point and wouldn't really know exactly what we were going to write about, but we had the skeleton. And early on, we just said, okay, I'm good at this, you're good at this, so I'll take this one, you take that one. And then we write it, and then we put it up on a drive. And then I would look at what Kyle wrote, and I would add elements, or I would say, hey, I love this, and I'd highlight that in green. In yellow, I'd be like, hey, we got some problems here. And in red, I'd be like, I think this is dumb, we don't need it. And he would do the same to mine. And then we would both write parts of it. And so it got to a point where I know, and Kyle knows which person started the chapter, but there are many different parts of the chapters that we don't know who wrote it, because it was so kind of in lockstep. And also, as the process went on, Kyle would say, well, I want to take my hand at action, and I'd say, I think I can work on continuity. And so we would kind of, as the story got later in the chapters, there was a lot more mixing of that as well, where Kyle wrote many of the action sequences, and they're really good and nothing how I would have written it. And it's amazing. And then I got to write some of the more, plot moving forward points, and got to talk about how we would do this, or how the big antagonist reveal would be, and all those kind of things. And so our hands are all over each chapter together, to where the majority, I'd say 99% of the people that have read our book up to this point all tell us that they can't tell that 2 people wrote it. And that's kind of cool. With movies, you've got Lord Miller, you've got the Coen brothers, you've got all these people that make movies together as co-directors. And that seems to be pretty common. when it comes to writing books, I think that there were a lot of blind spots that I had that Kyle was able to kind of fill in, and I was able to do the same with him. And so the two of us together made a much better team, making a much better story than we would have done on our own.
Was it pretty smooth sailing for the most part, or did you guys clash on ideas at all?
We learned pretty early on that if somebody really cared about something and was willing to argue for a while about it, we usually just let it happen. Because at the end of the day, we wrote this for us. It's fun. And so some of the things, if it went with a story, if it made sense in the plot, if it made sense of where we were going, we wouldn't get too caught up in whether or not the other person, if the other person absolutely hated it, then we talk about it. But more times than not, if someone was really passionate about their idea, it got into the book. I had this dumb idea that I really wanted that honestly, nobody would probably even realize who it is. But I'll tell you, Dan, this is just us and Kyle's not here to stop me. I thought it would be really, really funny and fun and cool to allow Chris Farley to be one of the counselors at the AA meetings. And so, this story that we have, you've got your dead rock stars, but there's also the Screen Actors Guild, if you would. There's the Dead Wrestling Federation. There's all these different people and groups of where they died too soon. And it's possible that maybe they were ruining their life in such a way where they got recruited to the DRS. And so to think about, Chris Farley running one of the meetings just made me laugh a lot, especially being around all those rock stars. I don't know if you were a big SNL fan back in the day, but Chris had like this interview show where he was like, there's a famous one where he's with Paul McCartney and he's like, hey, you remember when you wrote that song with the Beatles? And Paul McCartney would be like, well, yes, I do. And he'd be like, that was awesome. So that was his interview, so the thought of making him kind of do that in a more serious setting, but still be Chris Farley, it just tickled me and I wanted it. And Kyle was like, we don't need to do that. And the more we talked about it, the more I kind of pitched it, he was like, well, if you really care about it, we'll put it in. And I don't think anybody would really, if you're not paying attention, you might not even catch that it happens because we don't say his name, but we give some pretty strong hints. And I don't know. That's a good example of how we work through some things. I think also our friendship is strong enough that we cared about each other more than we cared about the story. And so if somebody's feelings were getting hurt or somebody felt like they were getting rolled over, we'd take a step back and we'd look at it and think about it and try to do our best to kind of rectify the situation because our friendship was more important than a book we were writing.
Oh, that's very cool. I like that. Now, prior to this book, neither of you had any writing experience. Is that correct?
Sort of. During our time writing it, we wrote this from 2018 to probably 2022. During that time, Kyle's job changed and he became an editor at a publishing company. And so he learned quite a bit of things on site. But before that point, he had not written something like this. I had written a book. I had self-published a book in 2018 and I did it on my own. And it was a trade book and it was a lot different than this. But we both had tinkered around writing, but just never had written a 100,000 word fiction story before.
Okay. Now, do you have plans? So you mentioned, possibly doing a trilogy. Do you have plans for any projects you'd like to try outside of this universe?
Yeah, we've got several. We've got a children's book idea that we think would be a lot of fun.
Oh,
We've been talking about it quite a bit. It's kind of, it's a little bit more about really understanding that who you are, you have gifts and you're special and anybody can use their talents for good. And so we have a fun take on that we're excited about doing. We've got a couple other stories that we want to tell. But right now our focus is the Dead Rock Stars universe because we'd really love to be able to finish that journey. But as you know, any good writer that cares about their story spends a lot of time working on promoting it. And so we're doing podcast after podcast. We're doing we're speaking engagements, anything we can get in front of people and talk about our story. We're doing that right now. It takes a lot of energy, creating social media. Our publisher's working with us and they're great. But if an author isn't hustling then nobody's going to know about their book. And so we're spending a lot of energy hustling right now to spread the good word about Elvis Presley and his team of secret agents saving the world.
You must be doing a good job because I was checking out some of your reviews, and this book has a lot of really good reviews. Were you guys surprised at how well received it was, or how'd you feel about it?
We were really, really proud of what we wrote, but very nervous about what people would think. It's one thing to think you have a pretty baby. It's another thing when the world starts to read it and think about it. And within about the first 5 people that finished the book and had things to say, there were a couple of them that weren't just friends, but they would be critics. They would really share what they thought. And to get some of the compliments that we got really encouraged us to say, we might have an actual pretty baby here. And so that's been a real honor for us. It's been cool. One of our favorite things lately has been some people that have talked to us have said, my friend recommended this, or I saw you on social media and I liked the idea so much that I started to read it, and I finished it in a week and I loved it. And I haven't read a book in 25 years is what they'd say. And so our book is not high art. It's not some philosophical pontification on the greatness of being. It's just a story that makes people laugh and have fun. And that has seemed to open up an audience for us that we didn't quite expect. And it's a lot of non-readers, which is really cool.
Nice. Now you've got a lot of, obviously a lot of real life people in this book. Were there any issues with that? Like, do you have to worry about like getting anyone's estate angry at you or that sort of thing?
We joked for several months that it's not a matter of if we get sued, it's when. But the reality is, when you write a piece of fiction, you can do whatever you want, with some exceptions. Our first draft of the book, because it's a rock star story, we had so many amazing song quotes in the book. And we quickly found out that that's what they'll sue you for. And so we were able to get a little creative when we wanted to talk about that stuff. And we're able to keep the essence of it in, but pulled out anything that could be litigious. A person's likeness, when it comes to fiction, you can use, especially if they've passed away. We noticed that in Quentin Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I don't know if you've seen it. It's Brad Pitt. It's Leonardo DiCaprio. He's telling an alternative historical fiction piece about the Manson murders. And it's set in such a way where he's using real people, and there's even real actors, real rock stars that are in the story of that time that he's able to use because they're deceased. And the one person who's in that story that isn't is Roman Polanski, and he never says a word in the film. And so you see him from the back. And so Quentin kind of opened our eyes to the fact, and we looked into it. In fiction, you can pretty much do whatever you want as long as they're not violating copyright. I heard about a book that was written during the presidency of Barack Obama, where it was a fiction noir where Barack Obama and Joe Biden were detectives. They were private eyes. And so they told that story, and they got away with it. So we felt pretty good about our chances as well. Besides, Dan, when you write a book, you literally make tens and tens of dollars doing it. And so I don't think anybody's coming after us anytime soon.
Yeah, I suppose you wouldn't have anything to worry about as long as you're not like trying to besmirch anybody's name or make them look bad.
That's exactly right.
If it's all in good fun, I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's always somebody that's not into it. The first dedication that we wrote at the beginning of the book is just a simple line, and it's on the very front page, and it says, "To everyone we've lost, but still love." And so our story is written out of admiration. It's written out of love. It's celebrating these people. It's not besmirching their name.
Excellent. Now, with all these characters in the book, do you have a favorite?
I really enjoy Lennon. I really enjoy Elvis. I really enjoy Jimmy. I enjoyed writing Janice. all of them are fun in their own ways. I mean, we even had fun with Tupac and Biggie, like just all the things about them and their caricatures. You know, when a real person is actually meeting them for the first time, like if Cole's meeting them for the first time, what would thoughts that he would have? What would be expectations? What would be assumptions? And so we had a lot of fun kind of playing with that for sure.
When you're writing this book, are you kind of envisioning it like a movie? Is that what's going on in your mind? It's playing
Oh
out like
yeah.
a movie?
In fact, Kyle and I we've pretty much cast it. We've pretty much cast all the actors for the different
That was
parts.
my next question.
Yeah, and I mean that's where we kind of started because we had a lot of fun kind of dreaming it up. Jim Morrison, he is played iconically by Val Kilmer in the movie The Doors. So we had a lot of fun thinking about what if Val Kilmer played Jim Morrison in this story. In 2018, it was kind of come out that he was battling some kind of cancer or something, and it caused his throat to be so irritated that it's really difficult for him to speak. So in our story, we made Jim Morrison take a vow of silence. And so, you know, in the off chance that Val Kilmer is still able to play the role, it's not a role he has to speak in. And so we did some things like that are funny for us that we just enjoyed, but also, you know, there's some people that have done some cool things. I think Kurt Russell's first acting gig or first, you know, movie kind of thing, he played Elvis Presley. And so the thought of Kurt Russell being Elvis Presley would be great. We also thought about George Clooney playing Elvis Presley with the right kind of pomade. I think he would probably be a good fit there. We talked about Robert Downey Jr. playing Elvis Presley. So we spent a lot of time thinking about some of those people. Why don't you give me a name and I'll tell you who we thought about.
Okay. Janis Joplin.
Janis Joplin, Holly Hunter. We thought Holly Hunter would be a great Janis Joplin.
How about Tupac?
Tupac, I don't think we've nailed that one down yet. We've talked around it. We've nailed down Jimmy, I think, but Tupac is still, you know, that needs to be just right. That needs to be a really great character. And so I don't think we've nailed that one. You picked a good one for me to Tupac and Biggie. We haven't nailed down yet.
Okay.
But we've worked on most of the others.
So I don't know if this is a fair comparison or not, but so when I think about this book, I'm kind of envisioning the Expendables, but just with like dead rock stars instead of those guys.
Or Ocean's 11, you know?
Okay. I'm just trying to envision like some of the various scenes that could be taking place.
Yeah.
Now, on that note, so this book is set in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, other than the fact that there's these dead rock stars that are alive, have you taken any other, I guess, creative liberties with the world? Any other unusual elements, I guess, that you've added in here?
Other than their, you know, secret hideout and some of their abilities, it's pretty much an homage to 1999. Kyle and I were right at the right age for that. We wrote what we knew. And one of our biggest inspirations is Ernest Cline. He wrote Ready Player One, Ready Player Two. And if you've read those stories, they are chock full, almost every other sentence of some type of a pop culture reference. So we had a lot of fun with that in our book. We had a lot of fun talking about, you know, when albums came out. Like there's in the first chapter, Elvis Presley is about to get into a big fight scene. So he turns on his MP3 player and he plays Ricky Martin's Livin' La Vida Loca. We had a lot of fun thinking about Elvis loving Ricky Martin at that time, because that probably would have been a song that Elvis would have done. So we had a lot of fun just kind of imagining what they would be like in 1999. That would probably be the biggest, you know, kind of liberties that we took with the era, but we didn't change a whole lot of what was happening at that time. We just kind of capitalized on it.
Okay. Now, did you guys have to do a lot of research for this book? Like, were you trying to make every rock star's personality like as accurate as possible?
I would say accurate is a strong word. We tried to capture the spirit of the person and maybe what this person would be like 20 years later, you know, or 10 years later, or 5 years later. I read a lot of books. I read several Elvis Presley biographies, learned a lot about him, understood a lot more about him far beyond his music or his caricature or just the events of his death. To really know who he was gave us some insight into who he could be. I spent, everybody knows something about Elvis, but they know the joke. They don't really know the real person. With the Beatles, everybody knows the Beatles. Everybody knows their songs. But what was John Lennon really like? I learned a lot of interesting things about him that I just didn't know as a casual fan. And it helped kind of inform our view of him. We found out that Jimi Hendrix spoke a certain way. We watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and so we tried to match his tone. John Lennon, when he talked in interviews, he said the phrase, "You know what I mean," 600 times. He'd say it real fast. He'd mush it all together. And so that's a part of our story. I read a Janis Joplin biopic just so I could understand her a little bit more, because honestly, what more do you know about Janis? You know, it was fascinating to listen to her, you know, living in a border town in Texas and being able to go to the border and listen to all that blues music, and it shape her and inform her. And that was just a really cool thing to think about. And so we spent a lot of time listening to interviews so that we could match voices. Jerry Garcia was a surprise to us. We wrote Jerry Garcia like a deadhead, like a hippie who was like, everything was far out, man. But when you go and listen to his interviews, he's extremely verbose. He's very philosophical. He's very well read, very thoughtful in the things that he says. And he's very just, you know, he almost talks more like a physicist than he does a rock star. And so we were able to kind of change that a little bit and get a little bit better spirit of that, where he's more of a guru than he is a deadhead.
All right. Well, you've thought about what kind of actors you'd have for a movie. So surely it's based on dead rock stars. So surely you've also thought about the soundtrack as well.
Yeah. Kyle went on Spotify and he made a playlist, and it's maybe not what you would expect. Instead of having all of the rock stars songs that are in the book, we instead did a chronological storytelling of all the music that's mentioned in the book. And so the very first couple lines in the chapter, Buddy Holly is singing "That'll Be the Day That I Die." We start there. You know, we end with, you know, things that are happening at the end of the book. And so it kind of, every chapter, if you were to read a chapter and then listen to the soundtrack, you know, the song list, the playlist that we've got on Spotify, it would be more meaningful to you. And some of the songs that are mentioned, maybe you don't know, and you listen to it and then you think about that scene with that song. It helps color in the different nuances to the things that are happening. And so we have a playlist. I think it's got like 60 songs on it, because we have a lot of music that's in the book. A lot of things that's alluded to. And, you know, these are musicians or rock stars, and so they're talking about music. And so we're able to talk about some of the stuff that's released in 1999 or around there that it's kind of fun. You know, the Counting Crows were a big deal in the late 90s. And so we have a long conversation with Jimi Hendrix and Cole about the Counting Crows. It's just fun to think about Jimi Hendrix talking about, you know, the lyrics in Long December or whatever, you know.
I'm just curious, what are Kurt Cobain's abilities in this book?
Well, lead musicians, lead singers are a little bit different than maybe other folks. They like to do things their way. And so we kind of created the secret agents to kind of have their ability to go out on their own if they needed to, and have solo missions. And so Kurt is the firearms expert, and Kurt is the one who goes out on a lot of missions on his own, because he's a little bit of a, you know, he's an introvert who likes to be alone. And so he's a little bit standoffish at the beginning of the story. And we get to see him kind of understand him a little bit more. But he's the expert marksman in our story.
Okay. Now, for inspiration for this book, were there any particular authors that inspired you at all?
Yeah. Ready Player One, Ernest Cline, far and away was the biggest inspiration of this. But then, you know, a lot of movies inspired us, how they were kind of written. And we looked to Harry Potter, and we looked to Hunger Games, because they have great first books. Like, they have books that you read at the first time, and they introduce you into a world. They're both written differently. Hunger Games, is it Suzanne Collins? Is that who wrote that?
Sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, well, why not?
I've never read it, but I've watched the movie though.
We'll attribute that to her if it's not. Maybe she wrote Twilight. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting them mixed up. But Hunger Games is written in present tense, and so it does something very interesting to the book. It causes it to be much more urgent and in the moment. But it's a great kind of telling of what the world's like and understanding these Hunger Games and the districts and all those things. And so we took a little inspiration from that. Harry Potter is this amazing story about this young man named Harry getting to see the world of wizarding for the first time. And so while our story doesn't have wizards or magic, it does have somebody experiencing a new world for the first time. And so we learned some things there. Movies for us, Men in Black is a really good movie that introduces you into a funny world that's different than you expected. You know, there's a quote in the first Men in Black that says, Elvis Presley didn't die, he just went home. And we thought that was really funny to think about, that he was an alien.
I remember that.
And so little things like that kind of inspired us along the way. And
Okay.
and we're Spielberg babies, you know? So, of course, everything he does inspires us.
Okay. I'd imagine this is a all ages book.
I would say it's a most ages book. I mean,
Okay.
honestly, if you're 12 or under, there are times where it can get a little violent. Also, you just don't, you have to have a parent that is going to help explain to you who some of these musicians are, and kind of teach you some history, some music theory, which I think is really valuable. And I think it'd be cool for a dad who's been teaching their kids, or a mom who's been teaching their kids about music, to be able to use this book as like a, hey, look at this person. He's really cool, and he did these things. And, but I would say for most people, you know, 27 or 28 up to all ages, even in their 60s and 70s, this story's for them. We have a love story in it. We have action. We have comedy. We have a mystery. And so there's a lot of things that even if you don't know who these people are, it's still a good enough story that you want to know what happens next.
Okay. So it's not like overly violent. Like Elvis isn't going Highlander on anybody.
No.
Okay.
But there are probably 3 scenes that are intense.
Okay.
I would say PG-13.
Okay, that's fair.
But maybe like 2, you know, maybe 3. So not anything it doesn't dominate the, you know, 100,000 words.
Okay.
There's very little language in it. Most good books stay away from that. And so we made that choice. And there's a lot of funny things that you could catch on whatever level you're ready to read it at, and kind of know, if you know your 90s pop culture, you're going to love it. And a lot of Gen Z today spends a lot of time studying the 90s. And so even the youngsters could enjoy it.
Okay. Was your plan from the beginning to make the book the way you did, as opposed to like maybe at one point you thought about having it take like a more serious tone to it or anything like that? Is your vision at the end how it started out? If you know what I mean.
I do. I was kind of thinking about that. I think that we always intended for it to be fun. I think there were a couple of chapters that we wrote early on that tended to lean towards serious, and we had to make a choice. What was the tone of our story? And we chose to lightly touch on complicated topics and lean more into the fun. And so there is difficult things that happen, but it's all in all, it's a really fun world to visit.
Awesome. I like fun.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably the number one thing I could say about the book. It's fun. It's meant to be fun. We're meant to have a good time. We're meant to laugh. And so to be able to get to do that in the middle of difficulty, in the middle of hardship, helps you make it through stuff. And so to have something you look forward to going home and reading a chapter, you know, and going back into that world, or wondering what happens next, it gives you a little bit of enjoyment that helps kind of get through some tough times too. We set out to write a fun book, and I think we accomplished that. So
Yeah.
our theme, our goal was always kind of the same.
Okay. Yeah, there's enough serious stuff out there anyway. We need some fun stuff too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Jay, the book is called The Dead Rock Stars, and you guys also have a website, deadrockstarsbook.com.
No, find the book wherever books are sold. deadrockstarsbook.com is our website where we sell books and we autograph and put a special little seal on every copy that we send from our website. And we've got some t-shirts and posters there. But if you're more comfortable with Amazon or Barnes & Noble or your local bookstore, you can order it through them. It'll show up, and that's great too.
Okay, very cool. And are you guys going on any book tours or anything like that?
We're super open to invites. So Dan, if you want to invite us for a book party, we'll come up on in Eastern time zone, and we'll come hang out. Or we could do virtual ones. But right now, podcasts have been both a lot of fun to do because we've met some amazing people, but it's also a great way to kind of meet new audiences that might not have heard of our story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad that I heard about your project because it definitely sounds like a lot of fun. And I know I'm going to be checking it out. Dave, is there anything else that you'd like to add about the book that we haven't covered?
Dan, thank you for having me. I know Kyle wishes he could have been here. He's not feeling well, and we had a great time talking to you, man. I'm good.
Awesome. Well, Jay, thank you so much. And Kyle, wishing you a speedy recovery. And again, the website is deadrockstarsbook.com. And I will definitely be linking that up in the episode description. Jay, do you have any social media handles where people can interact with you?
We do. The best way to there. So anytime you start these kind of things, you want to try to name everything the same way, and we just weren't able to quite line it up. So if you go to our website, deadrockstarsbook.com, at the bottom, we've got all the links where you can go to the different stuff. Instagram, we're very active on Facebook, and even doing a little X posting as well, or Twitter, or whatever you want to call it. We're doing that as well.
Okay, awesome. Very cool. Well, Jay, again, thank you so much for joining me. I had a lot of fun.
It was awesome. Thanks, man.
All right. And thank all of you guys for joining us. If you want to learn more about the podcast, you can find me on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Just search for A Happy Moment Podcast. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.